Thank you for joining us on the Winning and Selling Podcast. I'm Professor Scott Plum of the Minnesota Sales Institute, and with me is Bill Hellkamp of Reach Development Systems.
Do you dread the idea of Monday mornings? You know, the start to another miserable week at your job. Seldom is the problem the job. Instead, it's the people we work with and work for. It's been said that people don't quit a company, they quit bad managers. If you're experiencing these feelings, hold on just a little longer as Scott and I welcome best-selling author and speaker Eric Harkins to discuss, do you have the right leaders in place for 2024? On episode 597 of the Winning at Selling Podcast.
Well, Bill, we're coming up on episode 600, another milestone since we kicked off in April of 2020. So it's just been a fascinating, fun journey. I'm really looking forward. We've got a special guest lined up on episode 600. So stay tuned for that.
Surprise, yep.
Yeah, that's later on this month. I'm really grateful to have Eric here. I heard him speak some time ago and was really impressed with his content, his presentation, his delivery, his engagement. But before we do that, we're just going to skip over our book club. We are doing the book Go Giver by Bob Burg and John David Mann. Next week, we're going to be covering chapters 5, 6, and 7. And I think most people will like the topic, the law of compensation.
Oh, now you gave it away. Now they don't have to read the book.
I wanted to encourage them.
That was supposed to be a surprise.
All right. One of the goals that people have is to lose weight, make more money, and drink less.
Yeah.
And 10% of the people accomplish that. So I wanted to encourage them.
Well, the clubs, the health clubs are crowded right now. We got one more week and then they'll slow down. So
yeah, it is.
Before we start talking about 2024, we're really excited to have Eric here as our first guest in 2024. Eric is the president and founder of GKG Search and Outplacement. That's a Minneapolis-based consulting firm that helps organizations get talent, keep talent, and grow talent. He is also an Amazon #1 best-selling author of Great Leaders Make Sure Monday Morning Doesn't Suck: How to Get, Keep, and Grow Talent. And I didn't get the GKG until I read that. That's Get, Keep, and Grow Talent. So just in case you're wondering where GKG Search and Outplacement comes from. His goal is simple: help every company he works with make sure Monday morning doesn't suck for their employees. He's a motivational speaker. He's a consultant. He's an executive coach. When does he have time with his family? He's an expert at helping companies create a culture high performers want to be part of. Eric, welcome to the Winning at Selling Podcast.
Hey, good morning, guys. And thanks for inviting me to join you. Happy New Year. I appreciate being the first guest of the year. And Go
Started
Giver,
off right.
Book, so great shout out for Go Giver. But I know it's going to be a fun conversation. And Scott and I ran into each other not too long ago, and really do appreciate joining you. I know we're going to have some fun today. So.
That's great. Right. Well, help our listeners kind of get an idea where you've come from and how you've landed on your leadership style and what you propose for people.
Yeah, in the book, I say something like I spent 25 years getting my butt kicked in corporate America, and then had enough of that. But I really did have this really cool journey that I didn't do by design. If I was smart, I would look like I was setting all this up to run my own consulting firm, which I wasn't that smart. But started with Target Corporation in the Minneapolis market. I'm a Minnesota guy, and went through their training program and kind of got bit by the retail bug and ended up holding a lot of different jobs, from manager and training to my last job in corporate America was chief administrative officer for a $1.5 billion retailer that ran Verizon stores. We were owned by a private equity firm. And in that role, we were consolidating four different companies into one. And a lot of what we did kind of led to the book. And so when that run sort of ended, I decided to take the leap and started GKG. And then I wrote the book, and it's just been a super humbling and fun experience ever since. But I'm really passionate about this topic because I saw it work, and you alluded to it earlier. I saw it work, meaning if you're willing to really focus on two things, and the first is the quality of the leader that you allow to lead people, and the second is not allowing underperforming employees to show up every day. If you just focus on those two things, it is amazing what can happen for your organization.
Yeah, it
Wow.
is. It's fascinating how companies seem to put up with bad behavior. I don't know what that is. Are they fearful, or are they just scared of that person themselves?
Yeah, if we had the answer to that question, you wouldn't have a podcast, because that is sort of my journey. Like, it's 2024 and we're still talking about bad leaders. And every week I hear a story that just makes me shake my head. And, Scott mentioned that he heard me speak in my keynote. I share a couple of real stories that people just, they think they're fake. It's like, you can't make this stuff up. And those leaders are out there. And right. The answer to your question, Bill, is a little bit of a mystery. I can tell you that every leader I ever supported when I was in an operations or a human resources role, it is the number one opportunity. It's just not comfortable or natural for people to have tough conversations. But then we overcompensate and we don't have the fun conversations, which are the ones with our high performers, because those are easy conversations. And for some reason, we don't have those either. And we wonder why they leave, because they're sitting there watching their leader tolerate the 2 people, 3 people, 4 people on the team that are underperforming day after day after day, and they're coming in working their butt off every day. And it's not a surprise. But what I've learned, and then I'll pause, but what I've learned is, I think the biggest gap right now that we have across every company is that we hire leaders and we tell them what their job is. Hey, congratulations, you're the new director of finance. We'll see you Monday. We don't hire leaders. We don't hire leaders and tell them how we want them to show up and how we want them to act together as a leadership team. And that's one of the core pieces of my book is, do you have expectations for your leaders? Not the basic manage the P&L, get results, improve, gross margin. Those are easy. It's things like, do you bring energy and enthusiasm to work every day?
Right.
Do you build relationships at all levels of the organization? Do you support the direction of the company with no hidden agendas? That's a big one. And it's really fun when I do my consulting, because that's just not what we ask of our leaders. And when you start asking that, boy, it's a game changer.
Yeah, my favorite early question to ask is, what's your vision for the company? And everybody goes, make more money. Oh, that's a real empowering vision.
We're really looking forward to the new year. That's our vision.
Well, to be self-serving with the title of my book, I love to tell people who are out there interviewing, hey, in your next interview, ask the person that's interviewing you, hey, what do you guys do here to make sure Monday morning doesn't suck?
Great question.
And it is a really interesting question, because people aren't expecting it. Right. And it's funny, hopefully people, want to answer the question. A lot of people don't, and then you got your answer, but enough said, right?
Well, let's start with one of those stories, because I remember from your talk, I just really enjoyed some of these crazy stories about really, really bad managers that you've had to deal with. So lay one of those on us. I think those are a great way to boost it.
Yeah, well, probably my favorite one is, true story. Woman starts at a company, won't name any companies or people's names here. I don't in the book either, but, and it's the end of her first day, and she's setting up her office, and the senior vice president of operations walks by and says, "Who are you?" And so, "I'm the new manager of employee relations." "Oh, what are you doing in this office?" And she said, "Well, this is where they told me to set up. Is there a problem?" And he goes, I don't know. And he walks away. She's like, "Well, that's kind of weird." And the next day he comes by and he said, "Hey, we're going to go ahead and let you stay in this office. But this is a director's office because it has a window. And you're only a manager. So we're going to go ahead and let you stay in this office, but we're going to have to go ahead and board up the window." And they literally came in with a piece of plywood and put a piece of plywood over the window. And, I'm old, but I'm not that old. This isn't a story from 1920. This is not that long ago. And my point in my keynote and in the book is, that leader, that senior vice president, worked for that company for over 30 years. And you just wonder, what are we doing? Like, really? You're going to board somebody's window up because they have an M instead of a D in their title? And that's the journey. Like,
Why don't you make me a director? Wouldn't that be easier?
Well, yeah. Hey, I got an easy solution, right?
I haven't even printed my cards yet, so let's just do this.
Well, and here's the challenge, right? Every leader in that organization knew that happened. I mean, it wasn't like he did it in isolation. People walked by the office and said, "Oh, somebody must have broke the window." No, the day it happened, that story became legendary. And I'm telling it 10 years later, and that leader retired from that company after over 30 years. And so that's the goal, is why do we allow leaders to do things like that? Why do
and how many of the directors said, yeah, that's the right thing to do? They can't have that window.
Question. Great question. I mean, probably a couple, which was sort of systemic within that organization, but a lot, obviously, because nobody said, we didn't sit in an exec team meeting and say, what are we doing? Now, this happened before I joined the company. My problem in my career, and there's a reason I got fired twice, because I would walk in and say, I probably would have gone and taken the piece of wood down, but it's just like, how are we still dealing with things like that? And I've heard versions similar, maybe not quite as dramatic, that are much more recent.
Yeah. I've heard the size of the plant.
Oh,
you can't have that rubber tree plant. That's too big a plant for your status here. So crazy.
Wow. So why do leaders tolerate people sticking around? Why don't they just release them to industry sooner? And that's a line from Susan Scott, who we had on the show a couple of weeks ago. She wrote the book Fierce Conversations. Why do bad managers keep employees around that do not contribute to the morale or the culture of an organization?
Yeah, we could spend the rest of the podcast on that one question probably, and I'd love to get your guys' opinion on this too. I like her version. I always say, we need to invite our underperformers to go to our biggest competitor and do what they do best there.
Right.
We should do that with some of our customers too.
Oh, yeah, exactly. So, I think it's a couple things. One, like I said, I mean, it's not fun. It's not natural. People really struggle with having what people call tough conversations, which what I call is just sort of honest conversations, but sitting down with somebody. And I think there's this urban legend that it's going to be a super contentious, the person's going to scream, what if they start crying, what if they tip the desk over, what if they come after me? And I've told people, I mean, it's certainly not something that I wear as a badge of honor, but I had to fire a lot of people throughout my career. I was in retail. We closed stores. We did layoffs. I mean, we did all of that stuff. And I had one out of, I don't know, dozens, if not probably 100 tough conversations that led to somebody being very angry, right? It doesn't happen very often.
Which is generally proof you should have gotten rid of them sooner.
Well, and I'll tell a quick, for sure. And I'll tell a quick story. And this is a very recent one, but, it doesn't necessarily answer your question, Scott, but I think it's a really powerful story. CEO of a company, I'm working with them. They need to make a change with a leader, happens to be a sales leader, really struggling with it. A month goes by, 2 months goes by, 3 months go by. She calls and says, all right, we're making a change. And I said, good. And she said, I'm going to do it today. And she has a conversation. She sends the email out to the organization that this person's no longer, part of the company. And within 5 minutes of her sending that email, she gets a text. And it's a text from people in that organization. The sales team had gone into the break room and they took a selfie. And in the selfie, they all had a thumbs up. And they sent her the picture. And the only thing the text said was, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And she sent it to me and said, I should have done this 3 months ago. And you don't kick somebody, I said, hey, you did it. And that's all that matters. But what a powerful, true story of the team is waiting for you to do it. And I don't know why. If I had the answer to that, Scott, I'd have 4 more books on the shelf and I'd be retired by now.
Yeah. Well, I think sometimes
it's a mystery.
I think sometimes we assume that CEOs or people in the C-suite are some type of superhuman that has no frailties or no things they don't like to do. I've worked with CEOs that never learned to get up in front and speak. They're still afraid of doing that annual meeting.
Yeah.
It's just what they're not good at. They're good at 10 other things, but that's something they're not good at. Firing people. I think there's very few people that love to do that. And so it's going to hesitate.
Yeah. In the book, I say it. I say, I had to fire a lot of people in my career, and I never went home afterwards and high-fived my wife. Ooh, I got to do it again.
Right.
But then I do make a little in parentheses in the book. I said, well, maybe once or twice. Because let's be honest, there are some people that need to move on. But I tell, to your point, Bill, I tell CEOs all the time, you're lucky because you have the easiest job in the company. And they'll always kind of look, well, what do you mean? I said, really, you have the easiest job of anyone in the company because you only have one decision to make every day. Do I have the right direct reports? And if I say yes to that, then I should be spending my time high-fiving the employees, walking down the hall and getting people fired up about working there. If you don't like to speak in front of the team, great. Who's the leader on your team that has that really dynamic, engaging presence and loves to do it? If you don't like to have tough conversations other than with your direct reports, then who on your team can handle that for you, right? And it's sort of that same conversation all the way down. And I could tell other stories about, leaders who, I tell a story every now and then about a CEO that, went to have a really tough performance conversation with one of his direct reports, and the person was going to be terminated. And about an hour later, I saw the person sitting at their desk, and I said, hey, how'd your conversation go this morning? Oh, it was fine. And I went back to the leader and I said, did you have that conversation? Yeah. Well, what did you tell him? Oh, it was a tough conversation. I said, well, I don't think it was very tough because they're sitting at their desk. And it's not natural, but that is one of the big differentiators between a good and a great leader is that ability to have a difficult conversation, to manage underperformance. And the point that I try to stress in the book is that doesn't mean you have to be this really, it's not going to be a contentious conversation. It doesn't have to be a contentious conversation. You can sit down and say, Scott, you've added some real value over the years here, but we've made the decision it's time to move on. I wish you nothing but the best. If there's anything I can do to help in your next step of your journey, please let me know. That's it, right? But we think it has to be this half-hour long conversation filled with a lot of justification and examples. And if you're at the point of a termination in the book, I say, if a termination conversation takes more than about 2 minutes, you've probably said too much.
Right.
And that's not harsh. That's really actually being respectful, in my opinion.
So since writing the book and having people read it and kind of share their comments, what have you learned? What's changed? What's relevant in today's marketplace that your book really sticks to?
Yeah, great question. And, one of the things I didn't really think about at all, I spent no time thinking about, it is the title of the book going to resonate? How many people will the title of the book resonate with? And I will say, when I started writing it, I probably thought, the target audience is going to be somebody kind of like me, 20 to 30 years into their career. They've had a few experiences. They've had some good bosses. They've had some bad bosses. But what has really surprised me is how, and I guess it's good for the book, but it's really depressing in some levels, how much the title of the book resonates with everyone. I get emails from people in their early 20s that are on their second job in corporate America. I get emails from people in their 60s that are ready to retire. I had a woman walk up to me after one of my keynotes and she said, you know what I really like about the title of your book? And I said, no, what? She said, well, you could have written it 30 years ago and you're going to be able to write it again in 30 years. And as depressing as that is, she's probably right. But I think the other thing, Scott, and this is a much bigger topic that we won't be able to solve, certainly on this podcast. Probably one of the most humbling things for me is I had the opportunity last year to do my first international keynote. And it was in Europe, and there were leaders from 12 different European countries. And when we were doing the prep call, I said, hey, anything you need me to change, any, language issues, and they said, nope, it all resonates, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I got an email from a person who's now become, I'd consider him, a good connection, certainly a friend of sorts. I was just on his podcast, but he's an executive coach who's based in Hong Kong.
Mm.
I asked him, I said, Wayne, I was curious if this resonates outside of the US. And he said, Eric, the word asshole means the same thing in every country I've ever lived. And I've lived in 14 of them. And everyone has had a Monday morning where they didn't want to go to work. And I don't know why, Scott, but that just sort of hit me that, man,
Right.
This is not a Minnesota issue.
Mm-hmm.
This is not a upper Midwest in the US issue. This is a global issue that people have gotten to a point where they don't look forward to going to work. And, my daughter is 23, she's almost 24, and she's starting her career, and it's a fun stage of life. And, we were having this, conversation, and I said, the good thing about being in your 20s is you really are so excited about going to work. Like, I couldn't wait to go to work every day. And I meet with, not my daughter, but I talk to other people who are in their 20s and they're miserable. And I'm like, man, you're way too young to be miserable.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, I wasn't miserable till I was 40. Like, what are we doing here?
Well, let's go over and put this into context. When I heard you speak, you had 3 key messages that were important for companies. Can you run over those 3 key principles that you have? Because I think they're very important.
Yeah, I sort of alluded to one in my last.
So I want to bring that up.
So I talk about these sort of 3 lessons I learned along the way and how they became rules. And so lesson or rule number 1, it's okay to have fun at work. Contrary to popular belief in some companies, I promise you it really is okay. Rule number 2, poor performing employees don't quit voluntarily. And we all wish they did, but they don't. No,
they're the ones that can hide under their desk, and they seem to survive every riff.
Yeah. And, they know how to play the game, but all your high performers know what they're doing and they get away with it. You're right. But rule number 3, the most important rule, certainly the most important lesson I learned along the way, assholes are assholes. They don't change. Mm-hmm. And anytime I'm doing a keynote, it usually gets a little chuckle. And I follow it up with, people always ask me, Eric, what's your definition of an asshole? And I always tell people, I have no idea what the definition is, but I know who they are in every company I've ever worked in.
Right.
And I can just see it on people's faces or the head nods in the crowd when I'm speaking. And, listen, I don't know what the definition is, but you put a board over somebody's window because of the title. I promise you're in violation of rule number 3.
Yeah, I remember a company I worked for, and it was 3 shifts. They had the C shift was the worst overnight shift. And everybody hated the leader of C shift. So I was supposed to be consulting with their factory managers. So I met with them, ex-military, and I grew up in the military, so I know you don't have to be this way. But, he basically said, if I'm not yelling at you, you're doing a good job. And I said, well, that's probably not going to encourage a lot of people. Maybe we should try and change it, because I'm not going to change it. That's the way I am. Yeah. And I suggested they fire him, and they did within a couple of weeks.
Good for you.
And the challenge is these people just think that being a bully is a valued part of their persona, and they wear it like this badge of honor.
Yeah, they do. I mean, it's the old, and I didn't come up with this one. I love little memorable one-liners, but this one's not mine. But, hey, the beatings will continue until morale improves.
Yes.
And you're right. I mean, I think in some companies that's rewarded. And, I'd love, let me turn it on the 2 of you, because you guys have worked with more leaders than I have, combined for sure. What do you think keeps people from turning that blind eye to the underperformers? Or, I think there's certainly a real lack of self-confidence somewhere down deep with people who think they have to be really mean or aggressive or, celebrate being a jerk, whatever. But I'm just curious, in your coaching, consulting experiences, what are your thoughts on that same question?
So I would start off by saying, when you're onboarding somebody, you have to have really 3 goals. or a process. One is to set clear expectations in writing, making sure everybody understands what the rules are to play by. I think the second thing is that you need to be able to create accountability. Accountability is looking at an exchange of commitment back and forth to each other, and to measure that on a weekly basis, not a monthly basis, not a quarterly basis, not an annual basis. And the third is to be able to have consequences when expectations are not met through accountability. And if you follow those three steps, I think you're going to be able to have those conversations about expectations. And those that need to be responsible are going to be responsible. And those that need to be accountable need to be accountable. And through that process, I think it's easier to be able to have a non-emotional conversation about what the future looks like. So I'm curious what Bill says.
Well, I think from the other standpoint, why we don't get rid of them, I think we're lazy. We don't want to do the work that it takes to hire somebody, especially at a higher level in an organization. We don't want to take the time to guide them and coach them. Very little of that, I think, gets done in most organizations. We just let people go on with whatever they're doing at a whatever pace they're doing at. Scott and I were working with a company recently, and there was a person who was the sales manager, and I asked him, so what was your sales goal for this year? That was it. He got nothing. So I said, so was your goal do the best you can? He goes, yeah, that was pretty much my goal.
Yeah.
So nobody's setting, they're not setting objectives. I think many companies are successful through luck.
Yeah.
They're at the right place at the right time. Things grow and they have no flipping idea why they grew. And everybody's around patting each other on the back. And then you have this bad manager and it's like, well, it's just too much work to get rid of them. I don't want to, like you said, I don't want to have the bad conversation, the tough conversation. So it's not hurting anything. And we're growing beyond that anyway.
Yeah. Well, I think both of those are awesome answers. And I think, Scott, what you were kind of alluding to is, and I touched on it earlier, is we don't set expectations for leaders on how we want them to lead people. And so in the book, kind of the core is this tool called Lead, and it's 8 questions. We don't need to go through them, but, it's 8 questions to ask of your leaders. And the difference, and you hit on it, is when you have a set of expectations, and I don't care if it's 1 or 8, or you come up with your own, or you use the ones from the book or whatever, then it makes those conversations so much easier and non-confrontational. And I love that you said that. If you have an expectation in your organization that the leaders are going to build relationships at all levels of the organization, that's one of mine that I use. And you sit down and say, hey, Bill, I want to have a conversation with you. As you know, building relationships for our leaders at all levels is something that's very important to us. Scott has tried to meet with you 4 times and you've canceled on him for 3 months now. Help me understand how you think that's building relationships at all levels of the organization. Now, it's not that I don't like you. It's not that I'm not your favorite. It's, hey, these are our rules that we agreed to as a leadership team, and you're not living up to it. Help me understand why you think that's okay. And there's, it really puts the ownership right back on the individual to speak to it. So, I do think that if more companies focused less on, what their resume says and more on how they think they're going to show up, we do a lot of search work, and I tell companies, I'm not going to ask a lot of technical questions because I'm going to assume that they didn't lie on their resume. Right. And if they did, then you can address it very quickly when they join. I'm going to try to deliver candidates to you that people want to work with and for. And the example I always give is, I'm trying to find out if this leader's going to walk by the receptionist every morning when they come into work and ignore that person because they're not important, or stop and engage with every employee and get to know them. And those are just little simple things that we all worked with that leader that walked by the receptionist every day because he or she wasn't important enough for him. But boy, if their boss walked down the hall, they were the most engaged leader you've ever seen. So
yeah, when we work with companies, they always seem to want to hire somebody who is from the industry because they have industry knowledge. And what we advise them to do is, why don't you hire somebody who has good character traits and work ethic? You're going to put them in the industry that if they have good character traits and work ethic, they can learn your stupid industry. That's the only thing you can teach them. You can't teach them character traits and how to work hard.
Bill, you're making me tear up here. It's like, man, we had an opportunity to do some search work for a company, and it was down to us and a couple other firms that they were considering. And the issue the company had, to your point, was that we had not done search work specific to this industry.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, good, because that doesn't matter. And, we agreed to disagree, and I respect it. And all they cared about was, we need to hire more people who've spent 30 years in this one sector.
Yeah. All the failures that are out there in the marketplace, hire those people.
Right. And this is a company that I would say doesn't have a really bad reputation, but it certainly doesn't have a great one. Mm-hmm. And the difference between them being a company people start talking about, like, wow, I've heard it's a pretty great place to work, is one or two little changes, to your point, of bringing some leaders in who, don't necessarily have 30 years of experience in that sector, but they're going to get people excited about what we're doing in the organization. That's a big part of being a great leader, is can they get the team excited about what's going on? But embedded in that idea is that they're excited about what's going on, right? And I tell, one of my favorite messages is, hey, do you support the direction of the company with no hidden agendas? And I tell people all the time, it's okay if you think your company is on the wrong path as a leader. It is. It's okay if you think your CEO is an idiot. That's okay. Mm-hmm. It's okay if you think this company is clueless. It's just not okay to stay. Mm-hmm. You cannot be a leader at any level if you don't genuinely support what the company's trying to do, and don't underestimate your lack of engagement permeating down to your teams.
Mm-hmm. Right. We should probably wrap it up. Eric, I'm kind of curious. I ask all the guests this question. What book are you reading now, or what author has had the greatest impact on your career or personal life?
Yeah. Boy, I just looked over at my bookshelf because I've got a few, but probably the one that hit me the most recently was The Power of Regret.
Wow.
By Daniel Pink. And it's just a really, really good book. A lot of the philosophies we talked about of, hey, you can learn a lot from the past, right? And how to, do things differently going forward. So that's the most recent one that I would recommend, The Power of Regret.
Oh, well. All right.
Go Giver is a great book, though. I'm in a networking group, and we just reread that book a few months ago, and it's such a simple, quick, easy read, but that's a great one.
All right, super. Well, it's been a great having you on the show.
Yeah, thanks, Eric.
Eric's going to give us a couple of resources we're going to link to on the show page. But the best resource of all, go out and get Great Leaders Make Sure Monday Morning Doesn't Suck: How to Get, Keep, and Grow Talent. And that you can get that on Amazon. So terrific conversation. Scott, you want to finish it up?
Yeah. Our golden nugget today is: a nation's culture resides in the hearts and in the soul of its people, by Gandhi. That was one of his famous quotes. And I thought that was,
you didn't
really
want to say Mahatma? You just said
I didn't
Gandhi.
want to attempt it, because I'm sure that I wouldn't say it right, because I don't enunciate words like I should.
Well, you know what? That sounds just like what Eric's been talking about. A business's culture resides in the heart and soul of its people too, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Wow.
So true. So true.
So for all the information we had here on the show, the links to Eric's information, go to winningatselling.com. You'll find the information in our show notes.
Again, next week, book Go Giver by Bill Berg and John David Mann. We're going to do chapters 5, 6, and 7. And the topic is unseating the incumbent. So please subscribe and share this podcast with your colleagues and on social media.
Go out and get better, one skill at a time.
Wow.
Joyful selling.